Chapter 1065. He had always been the one tricking others, but this time he was tricked by Baisu. The fragrance of lilies was light and elegant, and the scent was very faint. After a long time, other than people like Rui who had sharp senses and a nose better than a dog's, it was impossible for ordinary people to smell it. He thought that Baisu had found her conscience and was grateful to him, but his kindness was not reciprocated. How petty could a woman be? Even if he had a clear conscience, he still felt guilty when he was stared at by these 5 pairs of eyes. Rui, come with me. He had to prove his innocence no matter what. Rui knew that Baisu liked women. Mississippi Lu had sharp eyes, so how could she fall for such a clumsy trick? He and Rui walked to the courtyard outside, and Baisu was still sparring with Xianxia. Ahem. Li walked to her side and was almost choked to death by the strong perfume smell. This time it was the smell of roses. Mississippi Lu looked at him, waiting for him to explain. Li looked at Baisu, waiting for her to explain. It was still the smell of lilies just now, and she had sprayed so much rose perfume in less than 5 minutes. Wasn't it a waste? Xianxia walked over, held Mississippi Lu's wrist and said, "Sister Rui, can you spar with me? My royal sister said that you are very good at martial arts, and there are still many things I don't understand that I want to ask you." A fresh and elegant smell came from her body. It was the smell of lilies. Mississippi Lu looked at Li, then turned to look at Xianxia and said, "Okay, come with me to the courtyard inside." Cute girls were always popular, and even Mississippi Lu was no exception. Xianxia was very popular when she was playful, and when she was obedient, she was even more popular. The one who was not popular was the small-chested, narrow-minded, cunning Baisu. Baisu glanced at him and said indifferently, "Consider yourself lucky this time. People with small chests don't have the right to speak." Li also glanced at her and walked back into the courtyard. Baisu's eyes were wide open, and her chest was heaving up and down. It looked like it was a little bigger. Xianxia made everyone happy, especially after Li Xian went to the mountain. Without that eyesore, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became much more harmonious. Li returned to his study and picked up a few letters. The letters were about the problems the fringe was facing. After reading the 2 letters, Mississippi Lu, who seemed to have just taken a shower, walked in with her wet hair. "That perfume just now was Baisu's, right?" "Ah. Baisu likes to use lily-scented perfume." Mississippi Lu tied up her hair and stood in front of the mirror. She said, "Don't worry, I won't misunderstand. Baisu won't like you and you won't like her." What? Li was puzzled. He could understand why Baisu wouldn't like him. After all, they had different sexual orientations. It was just like how he wouldn't like Fang or Li Xian. Why was Mississippi Lu so sure that he wouldn't like Baisu? Was it because she had small breasts? Because you don't like small breasts. Rui's words made it seem as if he had some discrimination against women with small breasts. Although there was a reason for this, it only accounted for 80%. She was narrow-minded, cunning, and unfeminine, which accounted for the remaining 20%. As Drunk Mo's due date approached, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became tense. Even Li Duan was much quieter than before. Several times he ran over to ask him and Rui if second mother was going to give birth to a younger brother or sister. The professionally trained delivery team was preparing 24 hours a day and resting in shifts. When Xiaotsue ran over and said that Drunk Mo was about to give birth, the tense atmosphere in the prince's mansion reached its peak. Rui held his hand tightly. She was even more nervous than when she gave birth to her own child. Li wanted to go in to accompany her, but Rui's attitude was very firm. She said that it was unlucky for a man to enter the delivery room, but Drunk Mo didn't agree. Li could only be superstitious. He didn't dare not to be superstitious. It was already a mystery that he could appear in this world. If he questioned the existence of gods at this time, who knew if he would be punished? After a long time, a midwife opened the door and came out. She smiled and said, "Congratulations, Prince. It's a little princess. Both mother and daughter are safe." Reward. Li breathed a sigh of relief and strode into the room. Yesterday was a joyous day in the prince's mansion. All the maids and servants were rewarded with a year's salary. All the servants who had worked in the prince's mansion knew that the prince was very generous to the servants. The salary they received was definitely not the number written on the surface. It was often more than 10 times or even dozens of times higher. It was said that the first midwife who came out yesterday to report that she was safe received a reward of 1,000 taels of silver. She was so excited that she fainted on the spot. When would the third madam be pregnant, and when would the princess be pregnant again? It was really something to look forward to. Before one became a father, one would never understand what it was like to be a father. The eldest daughter of the Li family fell asleep. Lying next to drunk Imo Li Duan stood by the bed with his hands behind his back, watching without blinking. He had a younger sister and there would be someone to play with him in the future. Father said that he was the eldest brother, and he had to protect his younger sister in the future. As a man he understood this even without father saying it. When his little sister grew up he would be able to bring his little sister to play on the slide, swing, and buy her candied fruits and candied fruits. These days Drunk Ink's food was taken care of by him alone, including the ingredients, and he personally went to the market to pick the freshest. Xuanhuan carried a small cloth bag and followed behind him, just like a little attendant. These days, except for sleeping in very few times, she would hardly leave his side more than 5 steps. If it were not for Bai Su also following behind, this must have been a flawless day. Su seemed to have made a breakthrough recently. Li Yi had not seen him for several days, but it did not matter. He just went out to buy vegetables and he did not need a guru to escort him every time. What's more, although Bai Su had a small chest, a small heart and a lot of shortcomings, her advantages were also very obvious. 8th on the heaven list, she was definitely a qualified bodyguard. With Fang in Yong County she could almost do whatever she wanted. Coincidentally they met Yang Fu and the others on the street. The old man with the surname Wang, Yang Fu and a few guards, walked slowly on the street, talking to Yang Fu as they walked. In the past, old man Wang often asked him some questions or talked about some things about the Jing kingdom. Later, for unknown reasons he rarely came. Instead, when he was talking to Yang Fu about the way of the emperor, the latter often fell asleep on the table. Li Yi could understand Yang Fu because the prime minister's voice had a unique charm, even he wanted to sleep when he heard it. Your Highness Jiang of Silla. The old man with the surname Wang also saw him, and cupped his hands to salute him. Li Yi looked at him. Prime Minister, this is... The old man with the surname Wang cupped his hands and said, Shuzhou used to be the poorest and most chaotic place in the Jing kingdom, but in just 2 years, it has become so prosperous and rich. This old man brought His Highness King Jing out to have a look, hoping that your Highness can learn something from it. Li Yi looked at Yang Fu and found that his eyes were staring at the fruit-candied haws on the street stalls, and there was a look of longing in his eyes. He felt that old man Wang was still a little too hasty. So what if he learned it? The reason why Shuzhou had become the Shuzhou it was now was not only because of its unique geographical advantage, but also because it was his territory, and he could do whatever he wanted. The Wu kingdom was still in someone else's hands. Even if Yang Fu learned it, it would be in vain. Li Yi bought a fruit-candied haw for Xuanhuan and Yang Fu, and the longing and envy on Yang Fu's face disappeared. Just as he was about to wave goodbye to them, a group of carriages slowly drove over from afar. The man in the lead looked left and right and suddenly walked over. He asked the old man with the surname Wang, May I ask, old man, how do I get to the Yong County government? The old man didn't answer but looked at him and asked, Are you from the Wu kingdom? The man was surprised. Old man, how do you know? The old man with the surname Wang thought about it and said, If this old man guessed correctly, you should be from the Xianxia of the Wu kingdom, right? The man's face was even more surprised and he sighed, Strange old man, could it be that you're a fortune teller? Seeing that he admitted it, the old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, If you're not from the Xianxia, how can you have a Xianxia accent? Although this old man is old, his ears are still good, and I can still recognize the dialect of my hometown. Leaving home at a young age and coming back when he was old, his accent never changed and his hair on his temples withered. Although Elder Wang's experience had nothing to do with this poem, to be able to meet someone from his hometown in a foreign country was something worth celebrating no matter what. The old man surnamed Wang looked at the group and asked, What are you doing here? The man sighed and said, Old man, you might not know this, but Xianxia has fallen into the hands of that dog of a court, and the people have no way to live. We were originally merchants of Xianxia, but we were really forced by that dog of a court to be afraid, so we thought of coming to Shuzhou to find a way to survive. He sighed and said, It's better when Her Royal Highness is here. It's a pity that Her Royal Highness... There were many merchants from the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom in Shuzhou. As long as they were doing proper business, they would not be discriminated against here after registering in the county government. The old man with the surname Wang naturally knew about these things. However, he was originally the Prime Minister of the Wu Kingdom. Now that he saw that the people of the Wu Kingdom had no choice but to flee to a neighboring country to avoid disaster, he only felt sorrow in his heart, and a certain belief in his heart became even more resolute. You don't know where the Yong County government is? The man looked at him and said with a smile, Let's ask someone else. The old man surnamed Wang shook his head and pointed ahead with a somewhat depressed expression. He said, "The Yong County government is just in front." "Thank you, old man." The man cupped his hands at him and turned to look at the group behind him. He said, "It's been a long journey and we're almost there. Everyone hold on a little longer." A group of more than 10 people pulled 4 carriages. The carriages were filled with children's toys such as windmills, rattledrums, masks, wooden swords and wooden swords. When the last carriage passed by, a man casually took down a windmill from the carriage and handed it to Yang Fu, who was standing by the side of the road licking the candied haws. He said with a smile, "Little brother, this is for you." Yang Fu was licking the candied haws and subconsciously reached out to take it. Suddenly, a tender voice came from behind him. "Dodge." The man held the windmill with a kind smile on his face. However, when his hand was halfway through, a trace of viciousness quickly appeared on his face. His speed suddenly increased and from the gap between his index and middle fingers, a bit of blue light shone out. Chapter 1067. While Yang Fu was frozen in place, Xiaoning kicked the man's hand away. The kindness on the man's face turned into ruthlessness. He suddenly withdrew his arm and his fist, which was glowing with blue light, smashed toward her calf. Of course he didn't have the chance. Bai Su sent him flying with a kick. With just one kick he could no longer get up. The poisonous needle between his fingers fell to the ground, glowing blue in the sunlight. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom, who had asked the old man surnamed Wang for the direction of the county government, had one hand in the carriage but he couldn't pull it out. He lowered his head and found a hand pressing his wrist. When he turned his head, the strong man next to the young man grinned at him and said with a smile, "What do you want?" Then everything went black and he felt a great pain in his neck. He lost consciousness. The old man surnamed Wang instantly reacted and shouted, "Protect His Highness." Yang Fu had already been surrounded by a few guards who had accompanied him. The dozen or so people had already drawn their swords and sabers. Li Yi stood motionless while Bai Su protected Xiaoning. Old Fong was like a black bear, killing one person with each slap. His fighting style was so violent that normal people would not be able to withstand a single slap from him. This group of people could be considered to have some skills, but they were no match for Old Fong, who was a beast in human form. He was strong and fast, giving them no time to react at all. In just a few breaths, no one could even stand and speak. Since second granduncle's devilish training, Fong was the best weapon against enemies who weren't strong individually and had a large number of people. The old man surnamed Wang was relieved and hurriedly said, His Highness King Jing, His Highness is here." A voice came from behind. The old man surnamed Wang turned his head and saw the 2 guards next to King Jing lying on the ground, each holding one of their arms. Their faces were full of shock and disbelief. The other 2 bodyguards placed their weapons against the pale-faced Imperial Prince Jing's neck. It was hard to guard against a thief in the family. Li Yi looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said in disbelief, "There's a traitor among you." No matter how meticulous Xianing's observation was, no matter how brave Fong was, and no matter how powerful Bai Su was, they couldn't stand the fact that there was a traitor among Yang Fu's guards. Li Yi was a little disappointed. What kind of soldiers did his martial nephew have? There were only a few of them, and among them, there were even traitors planted by others to stab them in the back at critical moments. Old man Wang's expression changed greatly. He pointed at them and said with a trembling voice, You, we let His Highness escape last time in the Thorn's Ridge. If we fail again this time, His Majesty will not let us off." A guard looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said, "Prepare 2 fast horses for us and send us to the Qi Kingdom. Otherwise I will kill King Jing right now." The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he said angrily, "How dare you?" The man sneered and said, "I'm going to die either way. It's worth it if I can drag King Jing down with me before I die." Yang Fu's face was already pale and bloodless. He shouted, "No, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Prime Minister, give them horses, give them horses." The old man surnamed Wang looked at Li Yi. Li Yi looked in Yang Fu's direction. That knife was on his neck and there was already a trace of blood. With just a light cut, Yang Luqing would have to rebel and become the empress. After thinking about it carefully, Li Yi hurriedly suppressed this immoral idea. He looked at the old man surnamed Wang and lightly shook his head. Shaking his head meant that it was too dangerous. If they weren't careful, they would have to let their princess become the empress, so he agreed to their conditions for the time being. The old man surnamed Wang clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "Fine, I promise you, don't hurt King Jing." "Wait a moment." The guard looked left and right, then suddenly opened his mouth and said. He pointed at Xiaoning, who was protected by Bai Su, and said, "Let her come over." The old man surnamed Wang was startled. Li narrowed his eyes slightly. Yang Fu, who had the knife on his neck, seemed to see a glimmer of hope. He shouted, "Yes, she is the princess of the Jing kingdom. She is more important than me, she is more important than me. Just tie her up. Let me go, let me go." The old man surnamed Wang's body swayed. He looked at Yang Fu as if he was looking at a stranger. His lips trembled, but he couldn't say a word. If it weren't for this little princess, King Jing would have been dead. How could he say such a thing? His body also began to tremble. His eyes dimmed and his face was ashen. The guard had just said it casually. He could only see that the girl was of noble status, but he didn't expect her to be so noble. If he tied her up, wouldn't their chances of escaping be greater? He pointed at Xianxia again and said loudly, "Let her come over or I will kill King Jing right now. If we die together. Then let's kill her." Li walked over and took Xianxia's hand. He said, "Let's go home. If we go home late, the fish won't be fresh." It was because the fish purchased by the residents wasn't fresh that he and Xianxia came out to buy live fish. If the fish were dead, they would have to come out to buy it again. He looked back at Fang and said, "Don't forget to have someone clean the floor later." The two guards looked at him with a stunned and shocked expression. "Then kill him." This was King Jing, not some random cat or dog. How could he just kill him? If he killed King Jing, what reason could the princess and the others have to rebel? How could this person do this? "You want to harm me, you want to harm me." Yang Fu's face became even paler. His face was full of despair. He shouted, "My royal sister will not let you go, my royal sister will not let you go." Li sighed. He didn't sigh for Yang Fu but for himself. He thought that Yang Fu was just a naughty and spoiled child. As long as he put in some effort, he would be able to bring him back to the right path. Obviously he was too naive. The surrounding crowd had already retreated when the group of people took action. They were watching from afar. You. One of the guards pointed at Li Yi and said angrily, "Don't think that I don't dare to do it." Li Yi waved his hand. "You do it. I'm watching." The two of them were stunned. They didn't know whether to advance or retreat. After two strange sounds, the two of them fell to the ground at the same time. There were two swallowtail darts stuck between their eyebrows. Yang Fu also fell to the ground. There was a stench coming from his lower body. Li Yi looked at Bai Su, who was holding two darts in her hands. Bai Su turned to look at him at the same time. He swore in his heart that he would never laugh at her for having a small chest again. The Yamen runners began to separate the crowd and gathered here. Fang pointed at the dozen people on the ground and said, "Take them back to the county office first." Then he pointed at the two people with darts between their eyebrows and said, "Take the bodies away." The old man surnamed Wang came to his senses. His eyes were dull. He looked at King Jing, who was paralyzed on the ground and had lost control of his bowels. He walked over and slowly squatted down. He didn't mind it. He picked him up and walked toward the crowd step by step. Ouch! The crowd dispersed. Hearing the sound, Li Yi hurriedly turned his head and looked at Xianxia. He asked with concern, "What's wrong?" She frowned and whispered, "I was careless just now and sprained my ankle. Go back and ask Sister Rui to take a look at it." Li Yi squatted down to check and found that it was not serious. It was just a little swollen. He must have sprained his ankle. He turned his back to her and said, "Get up." Xianxia blushed. She lay on Li Yi's back and put her arms around his neck. She said with a red face, This is not good." He had never seen anyone so happy after spraining their ankle. Li Yi tilted his head and looked at her. Xianxia put her arms around his neck and asked, "Sir, I sprained my ankle. Can I not go back to the capital right away?" "Go back to the capital? Let's recover first." Li Yi turned his head and said angrily. She lay on Li Yi's back with a happy smile on her face. She felt that the pain in her ankle was not as bad anymore. Li Yi carried Xianxia on his back. He looked at Bai Su, who was walking beside him, and suddenly said, "Miss Bai." Ever since he saw her skill with darts, he felt that as a man he shouldn't be too stingy. He should take the initiative to find a chance to repair their relationship. "What?" Bai Su crossed her arms and glanced at him. She said emotionlessly, "I have a few secret recipes here." He glanced at her chest and said, "They can improve your figure?" Bai Su was stunned at first. After she understood what he meant, she immediately blushed and said angrily, "What do you mean?" "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li Yi shook his head. Since she didn't care, he wouldn't say anything. Xianxia lay on his back and giggled. Bai Su lowered her head and remained silent. After a while, she turned to look at him and asked softly, The secret recipes you mentioned really work. Chapter 1068. Li Yi didn't expect Bai Su, who could only be considered half a woman, to care about her figure. He generously told her the secret recipe of the breast enhancement soup. He didn't have to worry that the effect wouldn't make her angrier. After all, this was personally tested by Emingzu. Bai Su wasn't even as good as Emingzu in the past, so the effect would definitely be more obvious. No matter how stingy this woman was after drinking his soup, she wouldn't stab him with a dart, right? Xianx's ankle was really sprained, but it wasn't too serious. Rui took a look and massaged her for a while. She told her that as long as she had a good rest, she would recover in 3 to 5 days. Who would have thought that after Rui warned her for a while, she couldn't help but get out of bed. As a result, she tripped at the door and sprained her ankle even more seriously. This time, it wouldn't be a matter of 3 to 5 days. She would have to rest in bed for at least a month to ensure that she would recover to the same state as before she was injured and not leave any future problems. As her injury worsened, she seemed to be even happier. When Li Yi walked out of her room, he actually heard her humming a tune. Yang Fu had already taken a shower and used a lot of soap. There wasn't a trace of the stench on his body anymore. There wasn't a single guard in the room, so he felt more at ease. He was afraid of guards now. Prime Minister Wang stood in the middle of the hall. There was a brown stain on his body that emitted a foul smell. The smell made Yang Fu want to vomit, but he couldn't vomit because it was the smell he got when the Prime Minister carried him back after he had lost control of his bladder. He still hadn't recovered from today's events. He had nearly died when the man had handed him the windmill, when the guard had put his sword to his throat. He had nearly died. He touched his neck. There was a blood stain on it and it still hurt a little when he touched it. If the knife was a little sharper, his head wouldn't be on his neck anymore. Fortunately, everything was over. That man actually let those 2 traitors kill him. When his imperial sister returned, he must tell her about this. Your Highness. The old man surnamed Wang ignored the stench on his body and took a few steps forward. Prime Minister. Yang Fu raised his head and looked at him. He didn't know why, but although the Prime Minister was very calm at this moment, he felt that the Prime Minister was very scary. Prime Minister Wang walked in front of Yang Fu and slowly sat down. He asked, Your Highness, do you still remember the way of the Emperor that I taught you? I remember everything. Yang Fu was overjoyed and immediately said, To be an emperor, one man is the heavens. With great power in hand, one must judge the situation, make the best use of everything, make the best use of people, have a broad heart to accommodate the world, and have a broad mind to accommodate all rivers. As an emperor, there is no need for him to be knowledgeable. He may not be able to compose good poems or write beautiful essays, but he must have the spirit of an emperor. He secretly rejoiced that he had memorized this part. Who knew that Prime Minister Wang would test him at this time? The old man nodded and asked, Does your Highness know what the spirit of an emperor is? Yang Fu was startled. He then shook his head and said, The Prime Minister didn't teach me. The old man thought about it and let out a long sigh. He slowly said, I indeed didn't teach you. But your Highness must remember that some things don't need to be taught. If you don't teach me, how would I? Yang Fu secretly muttered in his heart, but his face revealed an enlightened expression. He said, Yang Fu will definitely follow the Prime Minister's teachings and learn the way of the Emperor. The old man shook his head and said, Your Highness doesn't need to learn these things in the future? Really? Yang Fu raised his eyebrows and was overjoyed. The way of the Emperor was too long for him to memorize. It would be best if he didn't have to learn it in the future. Your Highness doesn't need to complete your daily homework in the future. Do whatever you want to do. The old man waved his hand and didn't look at Yang Fu again. He turned around and left. Yang Fu was still standing there in a daze. In the future, he didn't need to learn anything and could do whatever he wanted? This was supposed to be a happy thing, but why did he feel a chill in his heart? Yang Liuqing quickly walked into the courtyard and hurriedly asked, Is the Prime Minister and Yang Fu okay? She only heard that Prime Minister Wang and Yang Fu were assassinated outside today, so she hurried back. Wei Liang, who was waiting here, immediately said, Your Highness, the Prime Minister and King Jing are fine. Yang Liuqing asked, Where are they? King Jing is in his room. Wei Liang said, The Prime Minister is also in his room. The Prime Minister said that if your Highness comes back, please go and see him first. Yang Liuqing nodded and quickly walked to a courtyard. She knocked on the door. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room. Come in. Yang Liuqing pushed the door and entered. Prime Minister Wang was standing in the room. He was wearing an official robe and a high crown. He knelt down in front of her and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor. I'm sorry, your highness." Yang Liuqing was shocked and hurried forward to help him up. She said, "Yang Fu is not injured. Prime Minister, you don't have to blame yourself. I'm not referring to today's assassination." The old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, "Before the former emperor passed away, he entrusted King Jing to me. He hoped that I could set things right and support King Jing as the emperor. But I'm afraid that I can't fulfill the former emperor's last wish." Yang Liuqing's face turned pale. She looked at him and asked in a trembling voice, "Prime Minister, what do you mean?" The old man looked at her and asked, "Your Highness, do you know what happened today?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. "That little princess saved him. If it wasn't for that little princess of the Jing kingdom, would King Jing still be alive?" The old man with the surname Wang closed his eyes and said in a sorrowful voice, "But what is he doing? He wants to exchange his savior's life for his own. Such a heartless person who is worse than a beast, what right does he have to sit on that throne?" He knelt down again. Tears streamed down his face. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor entrusted me. I didn't teach him well." Yang Liuqing stood there in a daze. She couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. Her father and brother were killed. Her mother was forced to commit suicide. They had been on the run, gathered their forces and gradually fought back. They only had one goal. They wanted to suppress Emperor Wu, who killed his brother and father. They wanted to support the former emperor's son, King Jing, as the emperor. Giving up on King Jing meant giving up on themselves. Without this reason, they were traitors and plotting a rebellion. It made a big difference to them whether King Jing became the emperor or not. However, as Prime Minister Wang said, Yang Fu, he didn't deserve to be the emperor. "That's good." After a long silence, a smile of relief finally appeared on her face. She helped Prime Minister Wang up and said, "Let General Wei and General Chen dismiss those officers and soldiers. Let them divide the rest of the money. I've always made a mistake. In fact, your highness has also made this mistake." The old man shook his head and said, "King Jing is only King Jing. He can't represent anyone except himself. He can't represent the officers and soldiers, and he can't represent the world." Yang Liuqing was startled and looked at him. The old man knelt down again and kowtowed to Yang Liuqing 3 times. When he raised his head, his expression was solemn. He said in a loud voice, "I beg your highness, for the sake of the former emperor's last wish, for the sake of the people of the Wu kingdom, to suppress the traitors, to ascend the throne." Chapter 1069. Suppress the rebels and ascend the throne as the emperor. Yang Liuqing looked at Prime Minister Wang, who had a solemn expression on his face. His lips parted and he said with difficulty, How is this possible? Why is it not possible?" Prime Minister Wang raised his head and looked at her with bright eyes. He asked, "Your Highness has been in the Jing kingdom for a long time. Do you know the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom?" Yang Liuqing nodded subconsciously. The eldest princess of the Jing kingdom, Li Emingzu, was unparalleled in beauty and martial arts. She also had the ability to govern the country. She was close friends with her martial uncle. She was her master's strong rival in love. Prime Minister Wang gritted his teeth and said, "Since the Jing kingdom has a princess in charge, why can't our Wu kingdom have an empress?" "But," Prime Minister Wang looked at her and continued to ask, "Your Highness, do you think that we can still pin our hopes on Imperial Prince Jing?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. "If that's the case." Prime Minister Wang kowtowed again and said loudly, "This old official sincerely requests your highness to ascend the throne." The door was pushed open with great force and 2 figures walked in quickly. Wei Liang knelt down on one knee, raised his head and said loudly, "This official sincerely requests your highness to ascend the throne." Qin Qing knelt down next to Wei Liang and said respectfully, "This official sincerely requests your highness to ascend the throne." Yang Liuqing looked at their solemn expressions and couldn't help but take a few steps back. A certain sturdy wall in his heart seemed to be shaken at this moment. Li Yi used the extremely sharp dagger that Mississippi Lu gave him to make a crutch for Shanning. If she really had to lie in bed for a month, she would probably die of boredom. In order to stay here for a longer period of time, she purposely sprained her ankle and worsened her injury. Li Yi was angry and distressed. She wanted to find a suitable reason to stay. Why did she need to do this? When Li Xian came back tomorrow, she could pretend to break his leg by accident and let him stay here for a year or so. Wouldn't that be simpler and more effective? Fang walked in from outside and said, "Son-in-law, those guys were still stubborn at first, pretending to be tough guys. Later on, after a little torture, they were all released. The so-called tough guy was only relatively speaking. Fang's, a little bit of torture, was definitely not as simple as he said. However, this was no longer important. He polished the edges and corners of his walking stick and casually asked, "Were they sent by the emperor of the Wu kingdom?" "Yes and no." Fang shook his head. After thinking for a moment, he said, "They are not merchants of the Wu kingdom. They are all killers. The heads of Princess Duanrong and Prince Jing are worth 100,000 taels of silver each. Someone sent an invitation to the martial arts world of the Wu kingdom. If anyone can catch Princess Duanrong and that bastard Jianghu, no matter whether they are dead or alive, they will offer 200,000 taels of silver with both hands." 200,000 taels of silver as a reward for two people was undoubtedly a big deal. The one who had such a deep hatred for them and wanted them dead the most was the emperor of the Wu kingdom. To be exact, Yang Liuqing had a deep hatred for him. He was just worried that they would threaten his throne. Fang continued to say, "The two of them are currently the highest on the bounty list. They should have been targeted by many killers. A month ago, someone spread the news that they are in Xuzhou. As for the two guards, they may be spies of the imperial court of the Wu kingdom. They have been hiding around them for a long time. This time they should want to take advantage of them. However, I didn't expect that woman." Seeing Baisu coming out of Shaning's room, Fang glanced at her and continued to say, "I didn't expect Baisu to be so good at martial arts. Her skill in using concealed weapons is even superb and exquisite. It is rare in the human world and hard to find in the heavens. In short, Miss Yang and the others have been targeted by many people. If they go out alone, they should be extra careful." After Fang finished speaking, Yang Liuqing walked in from outside with Yang Fu. "Kneel down." When she walked up to Li Yi, she glanced at Yang Fu, who had his head lowered, and said coldly, "Plop." Although Yang Fu was full of reluctance, he still knelt in front of Li Yi. Yang Liuqing looked at Li Yi with an extremely complicated expression. After a long time he slowly said, "Yang Fu is ungrateful and did such a thing. It's all because I didn't discipline him well. Please punish me, martial uncle. You are you and he is he." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You have been secretly offered a bounty in the Wu kingdom. The bounty is 100,000 taels of silver for each of you. There should be countless people targeting you. When you go out, be more careful. In addition, I don't know if there are spies of the imperial court among your people. It's better to thoroughly investigate them. Don't let today's incident happen again." "I understand." Yang Liuqing nodded, glanced at Yang Fu and said, "Yang Fu, you go and kneel outside." Yang Fu didn't dare to disobey him, so he knelt outside. When the maids and servants passed by him, they couldn't help pointing at him. "This is the King Jing of the Wu kingdom. He's still a prince. He's ungrateful and returns kindness with enmity. At such a young age, his heart is already so vicious. When he grows up..." Yang Liuqing didn't say how long he wanted Yang Fu to kneel, but he only knelt for less than 10 hours before he fainted. It was unknown whether he was embarrassed or kneeling. A person's bad nature was completely revealed in this 14-year-old child. If he wasn't a child, or if he wasn't Yang Liuqing's younger brother, Li Yi would let him know the price of doing wrong and saying wrong things. However, he didn't have the slightest interest in Yang Fu. This child was already useless. Whether they wanted to live in seclusion in the countryside or wanted to continue to rebel and support Yang Fu as the emperor, it had nothing to do with him. He had to look after Shanning. He was worried that she hadn't recovered from her foot injury and would jump out of bed again. In the afternoon, Old Man Wang came to find him. At that time he was massaging Shanning's sprained foot. She was giggling because of the itch. The massage technique was taught to him by Baisu. She said that she didn't want to owe others a favor. In the martial arts world, it's not a burden to have more skills. Looking at the horoscope to predict one's luck, relaxing the muscles and blood, massaging to set the bones, rebellion. These skills, it was better to learn one more. Who knew when it would come in handy? Old Man Wang knocked on the door and stood at the door. He asked, "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, can I have a word with you?" Shanning smiled every time she massaged her foot. Li Yi had long wanted to run away from the door. Those who didn't know would think that he was abducting an ignorant girl inside. Li Yi walked into the courtyard and sat beside the stone table. Old Man Wang sat opposite him. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla and the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom, Li Emingzu, must be very close, right?" Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang. He didn't know what he meant by this question. He waved his hand and said modestly, "Just so." Old Man Wang looked at him and asked, "Then what does Jiang of Silla think about Princess Duanrong compared to the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom?" Li Yi thought for a while and shook his head regretfully. In terms of appearance at this level, there was actually no difference between them. It could only be said that each had their own merits. Emingzu was the domineering empress type. Although Yang Liuqing was a princess, she was the pretty daughter of a humble family. Their identities were not much different. In terms of martial arts, they were far apart. In terms of breasts, they were not far apart in the past, but now they were far apart. In general, they were still not as good as Emingzu. Old man Wang seemed to agree with his conclusion and nodded. His eyes were slightly dim as he said, "The eldest princess of the Jing kingdom is a genius. Your highness is indeed not as good as her." Li Yi was a little puzzled. For no reason, why did old man Wang compare Yang Liuqing and Emingzu? He wasn't as free as him. He still had to boil bone soup for Shanning to nourish her body. He stood up and said, "Prime Minister Wang, if there is nothing else, I will leave first. The soup is still boiling in the pot." Prime Minister Wang raised his head and suddenly looked at him. His eyes flashed and he asked, "Jiang of Silla, if we want to support Her Highness as the Empress, is there any possibility of success?" Li Yi looked at him and was stunned for a while. Seeing Xuanhuan and Chui walking into the courtyard, he turned his head and said, "Xuanhuan, go and see if the bone soup in the kitchen is ready. Don't overheat it." Then he said to Chui, "Go and brew a pot of tea." Prime Minister Wang's train of thought is very strange. Li Yi looked at him and sat down again. He praised, "I admire it very much." Chapter 1070. Pedantic, conservative, conformist, stubborn. This was Li Yi's impression of Geezer Wang. In reality, it wasn't just him. These high-ranking officials and old men all had similar images in his eyes. Only now did he realize that he was wrong, completely wrong. He shouldn't have looked at people with colored glasses, shouldn't have been biased, and shouldn't have used a single point to cover the whole. He had committed the most common mistake in the world. How was this the stubborn old prime minister? This was simply a pioneer with an avant-garde ideology. In the era without the Wu woman, Geezer Wang's ideology was hundreds or even thousands of years ahead of the rest of the world. What kind of ideological realm was this? Li Yi took a sip of tea, looked at him and asked, "If I support Princess Duanrong as the Empress, what will happen to King Jing?" Geezer Wang should have already thought of this problem. Without any thought or hesitation he said, "I will announce to the public that King Jing was ambushed by a traitor sent by Emperor Wu and unfortunately died. That traitor killed his brother and father, and now he even wants to assassinate his own brother. He has lost his virtue and has lost the mandate of heaven. The people of the Wu kingdom should rise up and rebel against the tyranny." To be able to think of even this kind of method, Geezer Wang's image in Li Yi's mind was invisibly raised by another level. "This is a good idea." Li Yi nodded. It was a rebellion after all. The most important thing at the beginning was to find a reason, such as a tyrannical ruler, losing the mandate of heaven, the fall of the Emperor's star, the coming of purple chi from the east. With this as an excuse, the rest of the operation would be carried out in a logical manner. Jiang of Silla is a genius who has assisted the Jing kingdom in its resurgence. He is experienced and knowledgeable, so he must be able to see further than this old man. Geezer Wang looked at him and said, "This old man only has one question. Is it possible to support a woman as the Empress?" Li Yi put down his teacup and said with a smile, "Prime Minister Wang, have you heard of an old saying?" Geezer Wang looked at him and asked, "What old saying?" "Anything is possible." The old man surnamed Wang thought for a moment and asked, "May I know who said this?" An ancient person with the surname Li once said that everything is possible. Li Yi smiled and said, "This sentence is for Prime Minister Wang." "Anything is possible?" The old man surnamed Wang repeated these words over and over again. After a while, he stood up and bowed respectfully to Li Yi. "Thank you, Jiang of Silla." In the eyes of the world, a woman becoming an empress was undoubtedly a fantasy. Several months ago even he could not accept it. However, too many things had happened in the past few months. First, Imperial Prince Jing had no talent or virtue, which made him thoroughly disappointed. Then the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom took charge of the government and rapidly rose to power, which also caused his mentality to change greatly. The Wu kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom. If he wanted to change the current situation, he had to open up a new path. This path was unprecedented since ancient times. It was the first path since the beginning of the world. He did not know if this path would work until he received confirmation from Jiang of Silla. He came to ask him only to get confirmation. This would be his unwavering direction in the future. "Prime Minister, you're too kind." Li Yi waved his hand and asked with interest, "A woman becoming an empress is something that has never happened in history. Why did Prime Minister Wang suddenly think of supporting Princess Duanrong as the Empress? I'm afraid it's not just because Imperial Prince Jing has lost his virtue, right? The old man surnamed Wang asked in return. Since the Jing kingdom has an empress, why can't our Wu kingdom have one? Li Yi said in surprise. Since when did the Jing kingdom have an empress? Although she doesn't have the title of empress, she is the real empress. The old man surnamed Wang said with certainty. The Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed and lazy. He is thousands of miles away from the capital city. All the affairs in the court, big or small, are handled by the eldest princess, Li Emingzu. If she isn't the empress, then what is she? Cough. Li covered his mouth and coughed softly. The old man surnamed Wang waved his sleeve. The Jing kingdom needs a vice emperor, but the Wu kingdom doesn't need one. We only need to support the eldest princess as the empress. As for the other matters, we'll discuss them after we've cleared out the rebels. Li took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. This time he did not have to cough anymore. Li Xian walked over from behind and put his arm around the old man surnamed Wang's shoulder. He smiled and said, Come and tell me. Tell me why the Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed. Who did it? Li Xian had returned half a day earlier. When he found out that Xianning was injured, he was extremely angry. He looked at Li Yi and said angrily, I've only been gone for a few days and you've already injured Xianning. How did you protect her? How can I be at ease when I hand her over to you in the future? Li could not refute this matter. Xianning used her other uninjured leg to hop over and said, Brother, it's not Mister's fault. It's all my fault. Where's the assassin? Who sent him? Li Xian's anger had not dissipated. How dare he assassinate the Jing kingdom's princess? I'm going to hack him into pieces. The Wu kingdom's emperor. Li looked at him and said, The assassin was sent by the Wu kingdom's emperor. Why don't you send your troops to wipe out the Wu kingdom? I'll lend you the red barbarian cannon and give you a 20% discount on the new weapons. Li Xian quickly calmed down. The war between the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had just subsided for less than 2 years. They were still at the stage of stabilizing the national economy. It was impossible for them to wipe out the Wu kingdom for no reason. Even if Li Xian agreed, the courtiers would not agree. Li Xian had nowhere to vent his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, I'll go and see how the old man's writing is going. Meditate and reflect on one's own mistakes. Don't talk about other people's wrongs while chatting. This ancient saying was very good. Don't speak ill of others behind their backs. Because old man Wang spoke ill of Li Xian behind his back, he was taken down by 2 imperial consecrators on the spot. The 2 consecrators were older than him, and there was no such thing as respecting the old and loving the young. Li Xian did not make things difficult for him. He just locked him in his room and made him write a 5,000-word reflection. The content of the reflection was to praise him, saying that he was wise and mighty, indomitable, talented and good-looking, and a famous ruler throughout the ages. Li Yi felt that old man Wang, as the prime minister, should not lack a 5,000-word vocabulary. If Li Xian did not vent his anger on him, it should not be a problem for him to double the number of words. As it turned out, Li Xian did not do things in such a low-end way. He only made old man Wang read what he had written with great emotion. According to an imperial guard who did not want to be named, the old man fell down before he finished half of the content. When he fell down, he vomited and had diarrhea. It was extremely miserable. Li Yi had not seen old man Wang for 3 days, and it had also been 3 days since he saw Yang Fu. In these 3 days, Yang Liuqing did chores such as cleaning the courtyard and drying the clothes as usual. She was more like a servant girl of the Li family than a princess. She never talked much. She just buried herself in her work and had little communication with Rui. Until the morning of the 3rd day, the weather was sunny and the breeze was gentle. Li Yi came out to bask in the sun with Xianning in his arms and played chess with her casually. Rui stood behind him and watched the game. Many times she expressed her disdain for his loss to Xianning. Rui, Ruoqing and 3rd Miss Chen took turns to take Li Mu from Zue Mo's hands and walked around the yard with her in their arms. A little further away, Yang Liuqing was helping Li Duan correct his movements. Under her guidance, Li Duan had been able to play a complete set of boxing. Of course, his fist technique only had the form, it did not have any power. Compared with Xianning, Li Yi's chess skills seemed very bad, or even no chess skills at all. So it made Mississippi Lu have the illusion that she could also beat him. Chapter 1071. Mississippi Lu's disciple did not belong here. Li Yi had long known that this day would come. Her injuries had healed a long time ago, and her martial arts had also improved. These days she had never mentioned a certain matter, but it did not mean that she had let it go or forgotten it. In her eyes, there was the great hatred of her parents and brothers, as well as the people of the Wu kingdom. She could let it go for a while, but she could not let it go forever. Mississippi Lu held a chess piece in her hand, and after a moment of silence she asked, "When are you leaving?" Yang Liuqing lowered his head and said, "Tomorrow." Mississippi Lu put down the chess piece and said, "Got it. Master Martial Uncle, I will leave first." She lowered her head and fell silent. After a long time, she said in a low voice and turned to leave. When she reached the gate of the courtyard, her footsteps paused. With this step, she would be in two completely different worlds, two completely different lives. Unfortunately, she had no other choice. She looked back again, turned her head and strode out. This game of chess was not finished because the players were not in the mood. Li was a bit conflicted. He had never expressed any intention of helping Yang Liuqing. First, it was because what she wanted to do was too important and risky, and it required a great investment of money. If he helped her with all his strength, even he could not afford it. Second, it was because fundamentally speaking he was not helping Yang Liuqing but Yang Fu. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, who was Yang Fu. But now it was different. From a sociological point of view, Yang Fu was already a dead man. He could not appear in front of the people of the Wu kingdom again. For the rest of his life he could only choose to be an ordinary person. And if he was not in a hurry, he did not need to use the red barbarian cannon to blast his way through. He could take the dog head of the emperor of the Wu kingdom within 3 months and take the simple and violent route. In fact, the rebellion could be done slowly. He only needed to provide some strategic support and weapons support to help her mobilize the strength of the people of the Wu kingdom, unite the front and advance step by step. To be honest, it had always been a regret in his heart that Emmingzu did not sit on the throne. However, since things had come to this, he could not possibly rebel against Li Xian. Now there was a great opportunity in front of him. If he missed it, it would be a pity. After all, if he missed this opportunity, he wouldn't get another one. Li looked at Mississippi Lu, thought for a moment and said, "This is her choice." Mississippi Lu stood up and walked back to her room. Li sighed. He knew that Rui was conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to help her only disciple, but on the other hand she had to think about everyone else. She would no longer act on impulse or passion. He carried Xianxia back to the room, walked out again and sat back in his original position. He pondered for a long time, but still couldn't make a decision. "What's wrong? Are your hands itching?" Li Xian walked in from outside and sat opposite him. He looked at him and asked with interest. Li glanced at him. "What do you mean itching my hands? Stop pretending." Li Xian looked at him and said, "I know. Your precious disciple nephew will be leaving tomorrow." Li needed to correct a mistake. Yang Liuqing was Mississippi Lu's precious disciple, and his disciple nephew. There was no need to add any attribution in front of the name, disciple nephew. He looked at Li Xian and said, "She has her mission. Do you think that everyone is like you, not doing a proper job and being muddle-headed and lazy in politics? Keep pretending." Li Xian crossed his arms and looked at him as if he had seen through everything. He said, "I don't believe that you are not tempted by her." Li looked back. Rui and the others had entered the room, and Mississippi Lu was not outside. He then looked back at Li Xian with a slightly angry expression. "Although we are very familiar with each other, don't talk nonsense. Do you think I don't know you?" Li Xian waved his hand and said, "Don't think that I don't know. You wanted Emmingzu to be the empress, but that incident happened and the plan failed. I know that you must have regrets in your heart. You want Emmingzu to be the empress and you want your second daughter to be the empress." He looked at Li Yi and suddenly asked, "Tell me honestly, do you have any special fetish? Do you especially like empress, queen and princess, He Emmingzu, Xianxia, Yang Liuqing, Yongning? You must have this fetish." Li Xian looked at him and continued, "This time it was personally suggested by that old man. I don't believe that you will miss this rare opportunity. Slander, naked slander." The reason why he was conflicted was because he did not want his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, to die for nothing. He also did not want Mississippi Lu to fight for Zhongtian or not. It might become a lifetime of regret in the future. Li Xian, that son of a bitch, what was in his head? Not to mention Emmingzu, Xianxia is still a child. Yang Liuqing is his martial nephew. Yongning is his younger sister. Despicable, shameless. Li pointed at him and said angrily, get out of my sight right now. "Don't, are you angry because of this?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "This is not a secret. We still have many spies in the Wu kingdom. If you need them you can call them, Li Duan stood beside Li Yi, pulled his sleeve and asked, "Father, where is senior sister going?" If the Li family was compared to a sect, then Rui, and him should be the first generation, and now there were also Ruoqing and Zuamo. Yang Liuqing was Rui's disciple, and counted as the second generation. Li Duan and Li Mu. In the future there might be Li Xiao and Li Rong, and their other children were also the second generation. In this generation Yang Liuqing was the eldest. Li Yi patted Li Duan's head gently and said, "Senior sister is going back to her hometown." Li Duan was a little disappointed when he heard this. Senior sister was gone, and there was one less person to play with him. But even he wanted to go back to the capital and see Xiaorui. Senior sister had been away from home for so long, and she must be very homesick. Old man Wang got into the carriage early. He was too ashamed to see anyone now, especially Li Xian. At his age he was caught on the spot criticizing others behind their backs, and then he suffered inhuman torture. This would be a stain that this old man could not wash away for the rest of his life. Wei Liang and Qin Qing stood behind Yang Liuqing, looking resolute. There was a kind of rustling wind and cold water, and a strong man who would never return. Yang Liuqing walked to Mississippi Lu, knelt down on both knees and respectfully bowed 3 times. He stood up and said, "Master, I'm leaving. Take care of yourself in the future." Li Yi was half a step behind Mississippi Lu. He could clearly see her clenching and unclenching her fists. Yang Liuqing turned and left. After a few steps he suddenly stopped and walked to Li Yi's side. He said, "Uncle, I have a few words to say to you in private." Li Yi was startled. He confirmed that she was talking to him and not Mississippi Lu. After glancing at Rui, he turned and walked into the room. Yang Liuqing slowly followed. She looked up at Li Yi and a smile appeared on her face. She said, "After thinking about it carefully, there are some words that I still want to tell Uncle before I leave. I'm afraid that if I leave this time I won't have the chance to say it again." Li Yi's lips parted slightly, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. What's going on? He suddenly thought of a ridiculous possibility in his heart, but he quickly erased this thought. This was too ridiculous. At this moment Yang Liuqing had already begun to speak with a smile. "Actually, Uncle has always been the person I admire the most in my heart." Li Yi secretly cursed in his heart. As expected, he had guessed correctly. Mississippi Lu was standing outside. If she wanted to listen she could totally hear what he said. However, she was about to leave. Before leaving, Li Yi did not want to hurt her heart anymore. How should he reject her tactfully so that he would not hurt her? Should he tell a white lie? But Rui's limpid eyes would not cut him with a sword out of kindness. "Uncle is very smart. In my heart, you are the smartest person in the world. You have penetrating insight and you take every possibility into account. There is nothing that can baffle you." Li Yi blushed a little as he waved his hand and said, "Not at all. Actually, I am still a little far from what you have said." Yang Liuqing smiled and said, "Uncle doesn't have to be humble. I have seen all the things that you have done all these years." He did not expect that she had secretly been paying attention to him for so long. Li Yi sighed and said, "I understand your intentions, but Uncle is very smart, but in some matters you are very stupid." Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, "Actually, Master and Uncle are very similar. Both of them will not easily speak out their thoughts. However, Uncle is a man. There are some things that cannot wait for a woman to speak first." "Ah?" This turn was a little abrupt. Li Yi did not react in time. "These words cannot be said to Master. I can only say it to Uncle." Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, "From now on, I don't know when we can meet again. I don't know if we can meet again. Uncle, take care." She said this last sentence, turned around and walked out of the room. Li Yi looked at her back and sighed. He said slowly, "You, stop right there." He rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Because of a certain problem he felt a slight headache. How to launch a successful rebellion in the ancient times. Waiting online. It's urgent. Chapter 1072. Yang Liuqing's footsteps paused, but she did not turn her head. "You are going to die like this." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Isn't it just a rebellion? It's not a big deal. Uncle Master will help you." Yang Liuqing's body trembled slightly. All these years she had only shed tears twice: when her father and brother had been killed, and when her mother had committed suicide, and when she had reunited with her master. She had brought Yang Fu with her when they had been chased by the imperial court. She had not cried when they had been on the run. She had not cried when they had fought their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood when they had been defeated by the imperial court. But at this moment, because of Li Yi's words, she had instantly burst into tears. She wiped her tears, and when she turned her head, her face was already smiling. She shook her head and said, "Uncle Master, I appreciate your kindness, but these are my niece's family matters. Please do not interfere." Li looked at her and asked, "Do you know what the first rule of our sect is?" Yang Liuqing shook her head and said in a low voice, "We do not have a sect and we do not have rules." "Now we do." Li looked at her and said, "The first rule of our sect is to be obedient." "Uncle Master." Li gently patted her head as if he was patting Li Duan and said, "Be good, be obedient, Uncle Master. If you do not listen, you will be punished according to the sect rules." She looked at Li Yi's solemn expression, opened her mouth and did not say another word. However, the tears in her eyes that she had been holding back rolled down uncontrollably, sliding down her face. At first it was only one or two, but then it became a string. She squatted on the ground and hugged her knees. Although she was still trying hard to hold back, she could not help but cry out. Li Yi was most afraid of girls crying. When Zumo cried, he could hug her and comfort her gently, but the person in front of him was his martial nephew. When Yang Liuqing cried, he didn't even know where to put his hands. Especially when Mississippi Lu heard the noise and walked into the room. She stood at the door and saw Yang Liuqing squatting on the floor, hugging his knees and crying. When she looked at him again, he didn't know what to do. Yang Liuqing cried for a while before she stopped. She stood up straight, her face slightly red. Li Yi thought of what she had just said and asked curiously, "What did you say just now? What happened between your master and me?" Mississippi Lu glared at him, then at Yang Liuqing and pulled her away. Li Yi was a little confused. He wasn't the one who had made her precious disciple cry. He couldn't help her, but he couldn't help her either. He was in a bad spot. It was normal for girls to be sentimental. There was nothing shameful about crying, not to mention in front of him and Rui. Old man Wang would be greatly embarrassed. Because he didn't want to see anyone, he had long hidden in the carriage, waiting to leave. But now that he was not in a hurry to leave, he had to get off the carriage and walk back under everyone's gaze. Even the servant girls of the Li family knew that the old man beside Miss Yang liked to talk behind people's backs. He was so old that he still pooped his pants. Old man Wang had replaced Yang Fu and become the man of the hour. As early as a few days ago, Yang Fu had been sent to the mountains. He would spend a very long time on one of the mountains in the land of chaos. Qin Qing had personally led people to the Wu kingdom to spread the news that the former emperor's legitimate son, King Jing, had been assassinated by Emperor Wu's men and died early. This just happened to confirm an old saying. Some people were alive, but they were already dead. Rebellion had never been a simple thing. Rebellion also had to pay attention to basic laws and core values. Li Yi played it down when he said it, but when he really carried it out, he had to be very careful with every step he took. Fortunately, he had a lot of useful information to search for and countless historical experiences to learn from. He didn't even have to tailor it for them. There were thousands of ways to rebel, and there would always be one that suited them. Moreover, she wasn't rebelling. She was also the legitimate heir of the Wu kingdom. What she wanted to do was to set things right. In fact, compared to Mingzhu, it was even easier for her to ascend to the supreme position. Mingzhu's real identity was a princess, and she was the real princess royal of the Wu kingdom. She had a very high prestige among the people of the Wu kingdom. According to Old Man Wang, they also had some old subordinates of the former dynasty who were deeply hidden in the imperial court. Before the official rebellion, Li Yi naturally had to understand these things first. This time he didn't intend to use too much power. Wang Wei and the others would be enough to manage the fringe well. Other than a few experts, the Lu League didn't need to move into the Wu kingdom on a large scale. Their power was never the deciding factor, and they were also not Yang Liuqing's biggest reliance. Historical experience told him that the more ferocious the enemy was and the more difficult the environment was, the more it was necessary to mobilize the power of the people. "Uncle Master." A figure came from behind and sat beside him. Yang Liuqing was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "Uncle Master, I don't want to take revenge anymore." Li Yi turned to look at her. She thought for a moment and said, "Once we start the rebellion, many people will die, many innocent people." Li Yi knew that deep in her heart she still didn't want to be a burden to him and Rui. But in reality he didn't want to be a burden either. In the face of an army of tens of thousands, their strength was far from enough. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Even if you don't start the rebellion, will there be fewer people dying?" Yang Liuqing lowered her head and didn't say anything. The Wu kingdom was now divided by warlords. There were conflicts between the imperial court and the major forces, and between the major forces themselves. The ones who suffered in the middle were the millions of innocent people. As long as this chaos didn't end, the people would suffer one more day, and the number of people who died would increase. She shook her head and said, I can't be a burden to Master and Uncle Master. Li looked at her and said, You're Master and I can't help you clear away all the obstacles. You still have to rely on yourself. A smile involuntarily appeared on her face. Even if she only had 500 soldiers under her command, as long as she knew that her Master and Uncle Master were behind her, she still had the confidence of a magnificent army. Yang Liuqing nodded and showed a hint of determination on her face. She said, Thank you, Uncle Master. I definitely won't let Master and Uncle Master down. Li looked at her and said, It's up to you to rescue the people of the Wu Kingdom from the abyss of suffering. Yang Liuqing thought for a moment and suddenly asked, Uncle Master, can I ask you a question? Go ahead. Li leaned back on the chair and put his hands behind his head as he said casually. Uncle Master seems to really want us to rise up and rebel? Really? Ever since the day Prime Minister Wang came to find Uncle Master, I felt it. Before that, I knew Uncle Master didn't want me to take revenge. It must be a misconception. Li saw that she was looking at him. He looked around and saw Xianxia, who had one leg wrapped and was sitting on the swing with Yongning. He thought for a moment and said, If Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, you wouldn't have escaped to Shuzhou. If you hadn't escaped to Shuzhou, he wouldn't have sent people to kill you. If he hadn't sent people to kill you, Xianxia wouldn't have attacked that assassin. If Xianxia didn't attack that assassin, she wouldn't have sprained her ankle. Yang Liuqing looked at him with a trace of doubt on her face. So, if Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, Xianxia wouldn't have sprained her ankle. Li looked at Xianxia, who was not far away, and explained, She's my disciple. If I don't avenge her ankle, I won't be able to take it lying down. He then looked at Yang Liuqing and said, So, you have to work hard to end the situation of the Wu Kingdom's clique. Take back the country that the traitor stole from you. If Yang Fu can't help him, you can become the emperor yourself. Govern the Wu Kingdom well and return peace to the people. Yang Liuqing still didn't understand why they wanted to rebel when Xianxia sprained her ankle. The expression on his face became even more doubtful. Forget it, these are not important. Li Yi waved his hand and said, In short, you have to remember to take back your father's country and become the emperor yourself. Chapter 1073. From the bottom of his heart, Li Yi actually did not want to persuade someone to be an emperor. This was the minister appointed by the late emperor of Wu Kingdom to entrust the orphan to him. He was the former prime minister, Old Wang. Through the deeds of the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom in charge of politics, and coincidentally, he met the emperor of the Jing Kingdom in Shuzhou, who looked the least like an emperor. After suffering a double blow both mentally and physically, he brainstormed for a while before coming up with this unprecedented idea that would shock the heavens and the earth and make the gods cry. Li could swear to God that he had no part in this process. What was more coincidental was that it was Yang Liuqing who wanted to overthrow the tyranny of the Wu Kingdom, establish a new regime, and liberate the poor people of the Wu Kingdom. Who was Yang Liuqing? He was Mississippi Lu's disciple, the only disciple, and his blood relative. Who was Mississippi Lu? She was Lu Rui, his sister-in-law, the only sister-in-law, and his blood relative. He and Rui were of the same generation, so Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, the only martial nephew, and his blood relative. Could he just watch as his own disciple sent himself to his death, and cause Rui to sink into pain and sorrow every time she thought of her disciple? Obviously not. Moreover, Xianxia had sprained her ankle, and he had to take revenge. Li decided to go back to his room and take out the proposal that he had been saving up for a while to refer to it. It was originally tailor-made for Mingzhu, but due to various reasons, it could only be put aside permanently. Li Yi had thought that he would never need it again in this life, but he did not expect that it could be put to use so soon. Although Mingzhu and Yang Liuqing had the same ultimate goal, they had different starting points, different circumstances, and completely different paths to take. One was a gentle replacement, while the other was a violent revolution. However, there were some similarities between them. It was a pity that Mingzhu did not come this time. Otherwise, she could have exchanged insights with Yang Liuqing. After all, she was his senior. Speaking of Mingzhu, he really missed her. He didn't know if she had gained weight or lost weight. He also didn't know if she drank soup often. He also didn't know if she missed him and his egg-fried rice. Li Yi sighed. In fact, he should go back to the capital to have a look. But Li Mu was only a few months old and couldn't stand the long journey. What's more, he had something important to do soon. After being idle for so long, his hands were really itching. The blood in his chest that had been cold for a long time seemed to have a tendency to heat up again. Which area should he start from? While Li Yi was deep in thought, a figure walked past him. He raised his head, thought for a moment, then waved his hand and said, "Su Zheng, come here for a moment." Li Xian was very regretful. He really wanted to see how Yang Liuqing would rebel. If possible, he even wanted to participate personally and fire the first shot of the revolutionary uprising. But they had stayed in Xuzhou for a few months. It had been more than half a year since he left the capital. There had never been an emperor like him. Many courtiers had already expressed strong dissatisfaction with this. There had also been a certain degree of instability in the capital. Moreover, he couldn't abandon his wife and children to wander outside. They were going back. Li Yi carried Xianxia on his back and walked on the street. Her feet hadn't fully recovered, and it was inconvenient for her to walk with a cane. So during this period of time, Li Yi was her legs. Xuzhou should have become the largest commodity trading center in the Jing kingdom and even in the surrounding countries. In a small Yong county they could buy the specialties of each country. They were going to leave tomorrow. Li Yi specially took her out to buy things today. Just the number of guards following behind to take the items was already more than 10. Baisu followed by his side. She was Xianxing's personal bodyguard. These days she was inseparable from her, so naturally she was inseparable from Li Yi. Luckily the enmity and grudges between them had already vanished into thin air along with that piece of secret prescription. This young Miss Bai's attitude towards him was much better, and occasionally she would even smile at him, which made Li Yi feel overwhelmed by the favor. He even felt that Baisu's previous sexual orientation was different from other women because she felt too inferior in some areas, so she had a rebellious mentality. Because her foundation was too weak, she could have obvious results in a short period of time. This directly caused her confidence to soar. Perhaps she could reverse this mentality. From the bottom of his heart, he still hoped that Baisu could be a normal woman. It was good to be a woman. Xianxia was a little quiet today. She lay on his back without saying a word. She was completely different from the past when she always had endless things to say. She didn't say a word, as if she had something on her mind. Whenever she was unhappy, Li Yi would always try his best to make her happy. However, today was different. She could stay here for another month or two in a self-harming way, but no more. A woman walked past them with a child. The child, who was about 4 or 5 years old, looked at the rows of sugar figurines on the street. He tugged at the woman's sleeve and asked, "Mother, what are these?" The woman looked back and said with a smile, "These are sugar figurines." The child looked at the sugar figurines in the shape of animals. His throat moved and he asked, "Can these sugar figurines be eaten?" The woman smiled and walked forward to ask the old man blowing the sugar figurines, "Old man, can these sugar figurines be eaten?" Seeing his mother walk to the stall, the child's face lit up with joy. His eyes seemed to be shining. When the old man saw that there was a customer, he immediately nodded and said, "Yes. Madam, how many do you want?" "It's only 2 copper coins each." The woman turned back and stroked the child's head. She said, "Did you hear that? Grandpa said it can be." With that said, she held the child's hand and disappeared into the vast crowd. Xianxia, who was lying on Li Yi's back, finally laughed. "Ah, sir, did you see that? That child was almost crying when he left." She wrapped her arms around Li Yi's neck and said, "Sir, I want to eat sugar figurines." She still remembered that the day before her husband left 2 years ago, he had bought her a lot of sugar figurines. She had not eaten them since then. Later, the old man who sold sugar figurines in the capital passed away. This was the first time she had seen sugar figurines since then. When Li Yi walked over, the old man got up from his chair and asked, "Sir, do you want sugar figurines? Do you want to blow them or draw them?" "The blowing ones are 5 copper coins and the drawing ones are 2 copper coins." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, "Can I blow one myself?" The sugar figurines that Xianxia and the rest had eaten in the past were all drawn. This kind of sugar figurine was usually used to eat. It was more difficult to blow a sugar figurine, but the shape was 3-dimensional and more aesthetically pleasing. The old man smiled and said, "Sir, don't underestimate these little sugar figurines. Even the simplest shape is not something that ordinary people can blow. Without years or decades of practice you can't blow it well." Li Yi smiled and did not say anything. Although his library did not have much of a presence, it had never dropped the ball at critical moments. To think that he knew about astronomy, geography, elliptic hyperbola, hybrid biosphere, satellites in the sky and submarines in the sea. How could a mere sugar figurine stump him? Although there was no book that taught him how to blow a sugar figurine, it was ultimately an art. Just like calligraphy and painting, they were different routes to the same goal. With the addition of body and breath control, how could a dignified expert on the heaven list not be able to do these? Under the old man's doubtful gaze, he washed his hands, took out a small piece of sugar paste, and skillfully pulled out a candy stick. At this moment the old man's eyes were already filled with surprise. Xianxia's eyes also lit up. As he blew, he pinched the sugar figurine with his hands. Soon, a simple figure appeared in his hands. The surprise in the old man's eyes had already turned into shock. The difficulty of blowing a person and blowing an animal were worlds apart. If he had not been immersed in this for decades, it would be impossible for him to be so proficient. Even if this young man had started practicing since he was in his mother's womb, it would still be impossible. This. He looked at the young man's rapidly changing hand gestures, and his body suddenly trembled. He suddenly looked at the girl on his back and cried out involuntarily, This is incredible, incredible." Although it was just a sugar figurine, from the sugar figurine's figure, hairstyle and slightly blurred eyebrows, it could be seen at a glance that the person he was blowing was the girl on his back. In addition to being shocked, the old man suddenly became vigilant. If the young people nowadays were all so powerful, his rice bowl would be ruined, sir. Xianxia hugged Li Yi's neck tightly, her face full of a blissful smile. "Cough, be gentle, I can't breathe." Li Yi stuck the sugar figurine on a bamboo stick and handed it to her, saying, "This is for you." Bai Su looked at the happy and satisfied girl, and then looked at Li Yi. She finally understood why there were so many mistresses in the imperial residence. She did not know how many women he had tricked with this method. For a young girl like her who had not seen the world, this kind of trick was the most attractive. Even the chief that she admired the most was tricked by him using some unknown method. And Senior Rui was a grandmaster, and he could even trick a grandmaster. She must be more careful in the future. Beast? She looked at the beautiful girl on his back and the lifelike sugar figurine in her hands. She secretly spat in her heart, "If you have the ability, blow one for her too." Chapter 1074. After blowing a candy figure for Xianxia, Li Yi noticed that Bai Su was looking at him strangely. It was as if she was looking at a beast. He thought to himself, even if her breasts become bigger in the future, she will still be as narrow-minded as before. It's just that I gave it to Xianxia and not her. So he blew another candy figure for her. It was a big-breasted woman with the same beautiful meaning and blessing. When the old man who sold the candy figure found out that Li Yi was not in the same trade as the one who blew the candy figure, he was obviously in high spirits. He insisted that he did not take his money. It was only a few copper coins, so Li Yi did not insist. Xianxia held the candy figure in her hand. She could not bear to eat it until they returned home. Bai Su could not bear to eat it either. She looked at the candy figure in her hand enviously. Li Yi placed Xianxia on the bed in the room and asked, "What do you want to eat today? I will make it for you." She counted with her fingers and said, "I want to eat spicy prawns, steamed fish, braised pork ribs and Sir's soup." Tomorrow she and Li Xian would set off for the capital. Before that, Li Yi would fulfill all her requests. When Li Yi walked out of the room, Xianxia sat on the bed for a while before jumping off. She put on her shoes and looked around the room. After a while, she found a brocade box and carefully placed the candy figure in it. Bai Su stood outside the door and looked at the candy figure in her hand for a long time. A trace of jealousy appeared on her face. She bit off the candy figure's breast. "I will be back," said Li Xian solemnly as he stood at the entrance of the prince's mansion. The fringe was a good place, especially the secret base that Li Yi had built there. In the past, the place he wanted to stay the most was the Academy of Sciences. But now, the Academy of Sciences was second to him. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Where is Xianxia?" Bai Su replied, "In the room." Li Xian sighed and said, "If only she could stay for a few more months." Li Yi looked at his legs and Li Xian felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine, and he shivered. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "You guys go first. Wait at the city gate. I will bring her there in a while." In the room, Xianxia's foot was still wrapped in white gauze. When she saw Li Yi, she said in a low voice, "Sir." Li Yi walked to the bed and squatted with his back to her. He said, "They have gone first. I will carry you to the city gate." "Wait a minute, I still have something to bring." Knowing that Mr. would carry her to the city gate, Xu Ning seemed a little happy. She hurriedly jumped off the bed, ran to the cabinet barefooted and took out a small box. "Wait a moment, I still have something to bring." Knowing that her teacher would carry her to the city gate, Xianxia was clearly happy. She quickly jumped off the bed and ran barefoot to the side of the cupboard. Fang said that next time he'll bring me and Dwayner to the mountains to hunt rabbits. Wu Kingdom, imperial capital, inside the palace walls. The hot sun roasted the ground and waves of heat hit. A eunuch ran through the palace gate. When he ran to a certain hall, he was already drenched in sweat. He didn't have time to wipe the sweat off his face or tidy up his clothes. He walked to the door of the hall and pushed it open. He stood respectfully in the hall and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from xianxia." In the hall, other than the young man sitting at the top, there were a few other people. A man in green cupped his fists and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 3 months, 3 more provinces in the northwest have rebelled. However, they aren't very strong. General Qing has already led the army to suppress them. We should be able to receive good news soon." The young man nodded and looked at the eunuch. He asked, "What's the matter?" The eunuch knelt on the ground and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from xianxia. Said that His Highness King Jing was assassinated a month ago. He has died." The young man clenched and relaxed his fists. He asked with a sullen face, "What did you say? King Jing was assassinated?" "It's news from xianxia. Everyone in xianxia knows about King Jing's death. Investigate." The young man's face was as dark as water. He said coldly, "Investigate this thoroughly. Arrest the villain who assassinated King Jing. I want to execute his 9 generations. 10 generations. Pringyong, I'll leave this matter to you. Don't come back to see me if you don't catch him." "Yes." The general in green immediately cupped his fists and slowly retreated. When only the young man was left in the hall, he slowly sat down and a smile appeared on his face. He turned around and a withered hand clutched his neck. Granduncle. He was lifted up by the neck. His face was red and he said with difficulty, "You." Opposite him, an old man looked at him with bloodshot eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "B*****. Do you still have any humanity?" His hand tightened slightly, and the young man's face became even redder. After an unknown amount of time, he released his hand and suddenly flung it. The young man fell to the ground, clutching his neck and gasping for breath. The old man looked at him and did not hide the murderous intent in his eyes. He said gloomily, "If you hadn't massacred all the members of the Yang imperial family, and only the 2 of us are left, I would have sent you to see your father today." The young man clutched his neck and suddenly laughed. He said, "So what if I massacred them? Isn't there still granduncle? If you kill me you can become the emperor yourself. You're just afraid that you're too old to have a son and leave the Yang imperial family without a successor." The old man kicked him, and the young man's body moved several feet horizontally in the hall. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but his face was full of a crazy smile. "Lunatic, you lunatic." The old man looked at him and said angrily, "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Of course you don't dare." The young man supported himself against a pillar and slowly stood up. He asked mockingly, "Other than you and me, there are no males in the Yang imperial family. If you kill me, who will become the emperor, my poor sister?" Chapter 1075. Greetings, elder ancestor. 2 eunuchs stood at the entrance of the hall. When they saw a figure in gray walking out, they immediately knelt on the ground. The old man did not even look at the 2 eunuchs and quickly left. The 2 eunuchs looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. How could they not have heard the commotion in the hall just now? However, among the 2 people in the hall, one was the current emperor, and the other was the most revered elder ancestor of the royal family. A battle of this level was far from what they could participate in. When the elder ancestor was young, he was the most famous prince in the Wu kingdom. He had once personally led an army and won a war that almost overturned the Wu kingdom. After that, he quickly quelled a few rebellions in the country and captured countless people's hearts. However, just when he had won the hearts of the people and the court officials, and was only 1 step away from ascending to the throne, he inexplicably went to pursue some illusory martial path and left the imperial capital. There was no news of him for 20 years. At that time the emperor was already beyond cure. Before he passed away, he searched everywhere for the elder ancestor, but to no avail. In desperation, he could only pass the throne to his younger brother. More than 10 years later, a prince who held great power forced the emperor to abdicate and rebel. His army had already fought their way to the outskirts of the imperial capital. He was only 1 step away from making the emperor pass the throne. However, on the last day of the 3-day limit that the prince set for the court officials and the royal family, his own head was hung on the palace wall. In one night, more than 10 generals who had participated in the rebellion were all killed, and their heads were separated from their bodies. The elder ancestor had quelled the rebellion single-handedly. From then on, he had become a legend in the hearts of the people of the Wu kingdom and the court officials. He was also the greatest glory of the royal family. It was said that he had already climbed to the peak of martialpath. His martial arts cultivation was superb, and it was difficult to find a match in the world. In the royal family, he had the highest seniority, the most respected position, and the greatest influence. Even the emperors of the past dynasties had to be respectful to him. It was a pity that there were not many people left in the royal family of the Wu kingdom now. After His Majesty ascended to the throne, blood flowed like a river in the capital. Those who were uprooted were not only the ministers who accused him of plotting to usurp the throne, but also all the men of the royal family. They were all killed by him for various reasons. Every time they thought of this matter, they would feel a chill down their spines. The door to the hall was slowly pushed open. He cupped his fists and said, "Please rest assured, Your Majesty." The young man returned to his seat and looked at the empty hall. He murmured, "The Wu kingdom only needs an emperor. It doesn't need an ancestor." The fringe had long been built into a stable base by Li Yi. After clearing out the bandits, the first thing he needed to do was to roll up his sleeves and work hard to focus on the construction. Up until now, the several mountains around the stockade village had all been renovated. There was a slide down the mountain, and the road up the mountain was also made of cement. After the dozens of mountains in the vicinity were surrounded, a city was formed. It was called the City of Rui. At first, Li Yi wanted to name the city after himself. Unfortunately, his name was not as nice as Rui's. The title of Wulin Chancellor and King of Bandits was Rui, not him. He had no choice but to give up. The headquarters of the Lu League had long been moved to the city of Rui. They occupied a mountain alone. After mixing up the bandits they had subdued, there were more than 20,000 of them. These people were in charge of the defense of the entire fringe. They were in charge of the defense of the entire land of chaos. With the cooperation of a few thousand people in the land of chaos, which was easy to defend but hard to attack, with the advantage of the terrain and sharp weapons, even the army of the Wu kingdom would not be able to break in. Of course, these were the forces of the city of Rui. Li Yi did not intend to use these people to help Yangliuking attack the city. They would not be of much use outside. Every summer, when the weather was the hottest, it was a good choice to come to Rui to escape the heat. Rui had nothing to do, so she taught a few disciples. Drunk Ink had been idle for a long time, so she could not help but start designing clothes. Of course, this included brassiere. This time, Li Yi had a reason to openly admire and help her come up with strategies. Ruoqing was actually the busiest. Although she had put aside the matters of the brothel, she had an even more important mission. In the near future, there were countless people in the Wu kingdom who were in dire straits waiting to bathe in the radiance of the Empress. In the far future, there were hundreds of thousands of lost believers in the Qi kingdom who were waiting for her to guide them. One advised people to be kind and charitable, while the other advised people to be evil and rebel. It was clear which concubine was real and which one was fake. Yangliuking stayed here for the time being because Li Yi's Empress plan had not been completed. He had to stay here to accompany his wife and child. He could only write down the things she wanted to do in detail on a piece of paper. Of course, he could not be bookish. He would not limit their actions to such a small book. From the Xianxia of the Wu kingdom to here, there was an extremely smooth road. The speed of information transmission was extremely fast. It could be reached in a day and new strategies could be formulated at any time. Li Yi wrote a part of the plan and walked out to take a breath of fresh air. He saw Su leaning against a big tree, with a chicken drumstick in one hand and wine in the other. He took a bite of the chicken and drank a mouthful of wine. He still looked so sloppy, but there was a faint sense of elegance. He had the temperament of a qigong. This was the demeanor of a different grandmaster. Especially when paired with the melancholy and hesitation that appeared in his eyes, Li Yi could almost be sure that this was an old man with a story. The imperial palace of the Wu kingdom. The emperor of the Wu kingdom looked at an old woman in the hall and slowly said, "As long as you help me with this matter, I will agree to any of your requests." The old woman had a head of white hair, but there were not many wrinkles on her face. Her body was not stooped at all. She looked at the young man in front of her, her expression as calm as an ancient well. "You are the emperor?" The young man was startled, then smiled and said, "Besides the emperor, who else dares to call himself emperor? I can agree to your request." The old woman looked at him and said, "But before that, you must help me find someone." Oh. The old woman narrowed her eyes. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepened. She slowly opened her mouth and her voice was cold, making people feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Sutian. Chapter 1076. Cough cough. When Li Yi saw that Su picked up the wine pot and gulped it down, he knew that he might have choked because he had eaten too much chicken. The one who loved to eat chicken was second granduncle. In order to satisfy his craving for good food, there were 5 cooks in the family who specially made chicken for him. There were a variety of methods, including dozens of methods and over a dozen cuisines. Occasionally they would even create new methods. Su didn't like to eat chicken in the past. He loved white rabbit creamy candies. However, he couldn't stand eating too much sugar when he was old, so he started to imitate second great uncle. Li knew that Su was actually from the Wu kingdom. For most masters, those mundane things could no longer pique their interest. They pursued higher martial arts. Most of them would choose to travel around in search of opportunities to break through again. Of course, Su's opportunities were not outside but here. Li walked over and sat opposite him. He asked, "White Rabbit Creamy Candies have released a new type of milk candy with low sugar content. It won't spoil your teeth. Su, do you want to try it?" The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head. He said, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" It was great to talk to such a straightforward person. He was straightforward and didn't beat around the bush. Li thought about it and said, "Su is also from the Wu kingdom. I don't think you want to see the people of the Wu kingdom suffer from war and live in misery. I'm not going." The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and said even more straightforwardly. Li was stunned. "I haven't said what it is. You want me to protect that little girl?" The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "I'm not going to the Wu kingdom." It wasn't good to talk to such a straightforward person at all. The sloppy old man stood up and said, "With your second young mistress and the experts on the heaven list, even a master won't be able to do anything. Moreover, the only master left in the Wu kingdom is Xuanhuan. He's also a member of the Yang royal family. He won't do anything to that little girl." Li originally thought that there was nothing to worry about in the fringe with Rui and second great uncle by his side. There were also many guards outside. Yang Liuking's trip back to the Wu kingdom was fraught with danger. With a master by his side, he didn't have to worry too much about his safety. However, since Elder Su said so, he did not insist. After all, Elder Su was a guest, not a servant of the Li family. He thought for a while and asked curiously, could it be that the Wu kingdom only has 2 grandmasters, Elder Su and Xuanhuan? 2. The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, 3? Isn't there another one here? That's even more impossible. Anyway, don't worry, there aren't that many idle grandmasters in the Wu nation. The sloppy old man seemed to be very unwilling to talk about this topic. After saying that, his figure quickly disappeared. Li looked at the old man's back and shook his head. Perhaps he was really thinking too much. At first glance, Rui's second great uncle, Su Chang, the Taoist priest with the surname Yuan, and the Taoist nun in the Qi kingdom were all masters. It seemed like masters were everywhere. But when he thought about it carefully, he didn't seem to have heard of any other masters besides them. He stretched his body and walked back to his room to finish writing the unfinished plan. Yang Liuking knocked on the door and walked in. "Uncle, you were looking for me?" Li nodded and took out a book from the drawer. He handed it to her and said, "Keep this. It will be of great use in the future." Yang Liuking took it and looked at it. She was stunned and looked at him. "Uncle, this..." Li pointed at the book Rebellion, What You Need to Know, and said, "This book is a general program and also a basic introduction. You can read it after you go down and see if you can understand it. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me. As for the next step of the plan, you can modify it according to the actual situation." Sorry, I took the wrong book." He saw the cover of the book and was stunned. He immediately took back the book Queen Training Plan from Yang Liuking and put it back into the drawer. He handed the book Rebellion, What You Need to Know to her and said, "This is the book. Read it carefully these few days. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." When he reached the door, he paused and said, "From now on, you have to be extremely careful with every step you take. It's time to get rid of those spies among your people." Other than the 2 guards by Yang Fu's side, Li believed that there were still many spies planted by the martial emperor's side. The existence of these people would always be a threat, and as for how to identify and deal with them, he believed that they had their own methods. Both Wei Liang and Qin Qin came from the military, and each of them had a group of absolutely loyal personal guards who had gone through fire and water with them. It was impossible for them to be disloyal. First, these people were eliminated. There were still a few dozen of them left in the fringe. They were all left in a mountain. They did not have to worry about food and clothing here, but it was impossible for them to send any news out. Whether there were spies among them or not, it wouldn't matter anymore after a few years. After this round of cleansing, they had less than 500 soldiers. Including the first batch of people arranged by Lu Meng, they only had a little more than 600. However, their combat strength couldn't be simply measured by the number of people they had. Not to mention that some of them were experts who could fight against 10 or even dozens of experts. Even with Divine Punishment's excellent equipment, it was enough to easily deal with the elite troops of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, they had only a few people they could use to begin with. If they wanted to turn the situation around with such a small number of people, only fools would go head-on against the army of the Wu Kingdom. Yang Liuqing and the others probably still needed some time to prepare. When the first step of the plan was formulated, they would walk out of the fringe and take the first step of the revolution. Originally, he wanted to discuss with Drunken Mo about a few trendy underwear styles, but Old Man Wang came looking for him. They could only slowly talk about the underwear at night. Li Yi admired Old Man Wang very much. He was avant-garde and bold. Although he was old, he wasn't pedantic at all. This was very rare in the current era. Moreover, in the future revolution, as the former prime minister and the role model of the literati of the Wu Kingdom, Old Man Wang would play a very big role. Rui and Yang Liuqing were both martial artists. It was very easy for them to carry a knife and kill people. However, if they were to talk about unifying their thinking, the united front, how to fight the land war well, how to establish and govern a base after a great victory, not only would they have a headache, but Li Yi himself would also have a headache. Professional things should be done by professionals. These days, after Jiang of Silla's explanation, I'm suddenly enlightened. After Old Man Wang walked in, he first bowed to Li Yi. In fact, it was more than a sudden enlightenment. After talking with Li Yi for the past few days, he finally understood that there was so much to learn about rebelling. Many aspects of it were similar to governing a country through different means. He had long heard that Jiang of Silla was the best in the world and was also a famous minister in the Jing Kingdom in the past. He always thought that the rumors were exaggerated. Today, after experiencing it personally, he understood that those rumors were actually not true. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Prime Minister Wang, is there a problem today? Old Man Wang nodded and said, Jiang of Silla should also know that the traitor who usurped the throne was insane. After killing his brother and father, he was still worried that there would be others who would threaten his throne, so he slaughtered the Yang clan with groundless charges. Li Yi nodded. He had also heard of what Emperor Wu had done. This was not only insane, it was practically antisocial and anti-human. No one would do such a thing. In this way, other than that traitor, there are no more males in the Yang clan. After Her Royal Highness ascends the throne, that traitor will definitely not be able to escape death. A trace of worry appeared on Old Man Wang's face and he said, But after Her Royal Highness, who should this vast world be handed over to? Li Yi understood Old Man Wang's worry very well. For example, the Jing Kingdom belonged to the Li family. It was fine for Li Xian or Li Han to sit, but Li Yi himself could not sit. Emperor Wu had killed all the males in the Yang clan. In the future, Empress Yang Liuqing would be bored, so she could not casually choose someone with the surname Yang to pass the throne to. Actually, what Old Man Wang said was wrong. Didn't the Yang clan still have Yang Fu? Forget it, Old Man Wang already thought he was dead. He respected the dead, so he would not mention it. However, on this matter, the Empress in the other world had already given an answer. Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang and said, What's so difficult about this? When your princess has children in the future, just pass it to her son. What flows in his body is still half Yang clan's blood, no? This was a very easy problem to solve. Let Yang Liuqing's son have the surname Yang, and then inherit the throne. Old Man Wang's thoughts were still limited, but it was already not easy for him to think of the Empress. This couldn't be circumvented, and Li Yi could understand. Although Yang Liuqing's child in terms of bloodline could not be compared to the orthodox Yang clan's royal family, if she became the Empress, this wouldn't be a problem. In the other world, there was still someone who wanted to pass the throne to his nephew. Old Man Wang came to a sudden realization and clasped his hands, saying, Thank you, Jiang of Silla, for dispelling my doubts. I thank you on behalf of the people of the Wu Kingdom. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hands again. The child born by Yang Liuqing would inherit the Wu Kingdom, so what was there to thank him for? He couldn't help her give birth to a son. Chapter 1077. Although Li Yi was her martial uncle, as a martial uncle, he could help Yang Liuqing rebel, but he couldn't help her give birth to a son. He only cared about how Yang Liuqing would ascend the throne, avenge her father and brother, and realize his long-cherished wish. As for who she would pass the throne to after she became the Empress, it was not something he, as a martial uncle, needed to worry about. Old Man Wang came with doubts and confusion. After Li Yi's guidance, he left with a happy face. After a while, Wei Liang and Qin Qing came again. For this martial nephew, Li Yi really worried a lot. Not only did he have to help her make a plan, but he also had to help her subordinates improve their ideological level. Wei Liang and Qin Qing were both former border generals, but guarding the border was different from rebelling. Li Yi needed to teach them how to start the first war, how to improve the military system, including how to expand the organization, how to do a good job in the United Front, and how to create a wave. Li Yi had always advocated that special people be used for special purposes, and the ideological work was handed over to Old Man Wang. He was very reassured. How to make nursery rhymes, how to stuff silk into a fish's stomach, how to write persuasion forms, he was definitely a professional. And Wei Liang and Qin Qing, their responsibilities were actually more important. How to develop their camp from 500 people to 50,000 people, how to fight every battle, how to defend every city, how to help the Empress clear all the obstacles along the way. Such a heavy burden would be on their shoulders. Unknowingly they had talked for more than 2 hours. Li Yi waved his hand tiredly and said, "Let's stop here for today." When the two left, they bowed deeply to him. These days what they learned from Jiang of Silla was enough to use for a lifetime. Li Yi leaned against the back of the chair, closed his eyes and rested for a while. Although he was a little tired, it was worth it. Not to mention that he did all this to help his martial nephew, but also to satisfy some kind of complex in his heart. Moreover, Rui had become much gentler to him these days. Was all worth it? He leaned against the chair. After an unknown amount of time, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders and began to gently press down. It was not Rui, Xuanhuan or Ruoqing or any of them, only Rui would use such a jerky technique. He was in a dilemma. On one hand he hoped that Rui would continue to be gentle, but on the other hand he hoped that she would return to her original self. She was becoming less and less like herself. If she deliberately suppressed it, would she be unhappy? Of course, it was only out of concern for Rui, and not because he had some weird fetish or awakened some attribute that he shouldn't have awakened. At some point, Rui's hand on his shoulder paused and said, "Thank you." "Thank me for what?" Li opened his eyes and asked in confusion. "Thank you for being willing to help her." "I'm helping her, why are you thanking me?" Mississippi Lu did not answer. Li thought about it and waved his hand. He said, "Actually, it's not as complicated as you think. Think about it, if your disciple becomes the Empress, you will be the Empress's teacher, and I will be the Empress's martial uncle. My seniority will be higher than the Empress's, and it will be so prestigious." Mississippi Lu paused and asked, "You're doing this for this? What else could it be?" Li shook his head and said, "Besides, if she becomes the Empress, you will be the Empress's teacher. At that time, even if Emingzu really becomes the Empress, won't you still be better than her?" Mississippi Lu frowned and said, "Even without this matter, I will still be better than her." There was no need for a family to be so calculative. Li naturally would not mention that she had lost to Mingzhu in a duel. He shook his head and said, "Aren't I just adding flowers to brocade?" Mississippi Lu seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Since you helped Yang Liuqing to ascend the throne because you want to be the Empress's martial uncle, then what did you want to do when you made Emingzu the Empress?" Li closed his eyes and said, "I've been talking to them for too long. I'm a little sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while." He was actually really sleepy, but the hands on his shoulders were getting stronger and stronger, making it hard for him to fall asleep. Tsang Province. Tsang Province was located at the northwest border of the Wu Kingdom. Although it was not considered a barren land, it was too far away from the imperial capital and bordered the fringe. From time to time, bandits would come out of the mountains to wreak havoc. For hundreds of years, the people of Tsang Province had been plagued by bandits. In the past 2 years, the bandits in the fringe had been eliminated, but the lives of the people had become even more difficult. Ever since the Wu Kingdom fell into chaos a few years ago, the imperial court had lost control of Tsang Province. In the past few years, Tsang Province had changed hands several times. First, a tyrant took advantage of the chaos in the country and attacked the provincial capital. He killed the provincial governor and his assistant officials and proclaimed himself king. Of course, they were annihilated by the imperial court a few months later. After that, Tsang Province was attacked by several other tyrant forces. The imperial court retreated and retreated. 2 years ago, Princess Duanrong used her iron fist to wipe out the rebellious forces in Tsang Province. She promulgated several policies to benefit the people, allowing the people of Tsang Province to have a short period of time to recuperate. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. Just a year ago, Princess Duanrong was besieged by the imperial court and several enlistment forces. After the defeat, there was no news of her. On the surface, Song province had been reclaimed by the imperial court. However, with the imperial court's military strength, they were unable to suppress the rebellious forces that took advantage of the situation in the past year. The people suffered from the rebellious forces and their lives were extremely difficult. In a village several dozen miles away from Song province's capital, a white-haired village chief was kneeling on the ground, tears streaming down his aged face. He pleaded, "Lord Steward, please give us a little more time. Please give us a few more days. 2 days ago, the village was robbed and we only have this little bit of food left. If you take this food away, we won't be able to survive." A middle-aged man dressed in a satin robe glanced at him and said coldly, "It's only right and proper to pay a debt. What does it have to do with me that you were robbed? I only know that if you can't pay the rent that you are supposed to pay, the master will punish me when I return. If I give you a little more time, who will give me a little more time?" He looked at the people behind him and said, "What are you waiting for? Take all the food away." The servants carried the sacks on their backs. Among the crowd below, more than 10 men dressed in coarse clothes had grief and indignation on their faces. However, they could only stand where they were, not daring to make any sudden movements. If they made a move on these people, the ones who would come knocking on their door tomorrow would be the constables of the government. Watching as the people carried the food onto the horse carriage, the middle-aged man looked down and frowned. "You've only paid less than 30% of the rent. I'll give you half a month's time. If you still can't pay after half a month, don't blame me for being impolite." Half a month. The village chief watched as the people carried the last of the village's food away. He collapsed on the ground with lifeless eyes and muttered, "Half a month, half a month. Half a month, everyone will starve to death." He sat on the ground and pointed at the sky as he cursed, damned heaven, you're not giving us a way out. You're sending us to our deaths." None of the villagers spoke. Their eyes were empty as they stared blankly in front of them. The autumn harvest had just ended, and all the food had been robbed by the bandits. Unable to pay the rent, the master had plundered all their food. There were nearly 100 mouths in this village, and they were about to run out of food. How could they survive until the next year? This King world doesn't give us a way out at all. How good would it be if Her Royal Highness was still here? Xiaoyun. The woman's panicked voice woke everyone up and they all looked in the direction of the voice. A 7 or 8-year-old girl with messy hair and ragged clothes was lying on the ground. The woman crouched on the ground and picked up the girl, shaking her in panic. "Xiaoyun, what's wrong with you?" The village chief crawled up from the ground and quickly walked over. He touched the girl's forehead and shook his head. "This child has been sick for a few days. Hurry up and find a doctor. If we delay any longer, she'll die." The woman's face was filled with despair. They couldn't even eat, so where would they find the money to find a doctor? She hugged the girl and cried, Xiaoyun, I'm so sorry. Sister-in-law, what happened?" The woman raised her head when she heard the voice beside her. She saw a young man walking over from the side of the road. The young man walked to the woman's side and crouched down. He pinched the little girl's philtrum and she slowly regained consciousness. She looked at the woman and weakly said, "Mother, I'm hungry." The woman hurriedly wiped her tears and said, "Mother will go find something for you to eat." The young man took out a package from his bosom. After opening it, he took out a steamed bun and handed it to the little girl. "Eat something first." The little girl was startled. The next moment she took the steamed bun and wolfed it down. The young man turned back and said to the man with a red cross armband standing on the side of the road, "This little girl is sick. Come and take a look at her." He looked at the woman and smiled. "Don't worry, he's a doctor." All of this happened very quickly. The woman was stunned for a moment before she immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the young man a few times. She loudly said, "Thank you for your great kindness, thank you for your great kindness." The young man shook his head and smiled. "There's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress." You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.